I never thought I'd feel like a stranger in my own house. But every morning, when I woke up and walked into the kitchen, I felt like I didn't belong. Sarah, can you pick up some groceries on your way home? And don't forget, we need milk, eggs, and that special coffee your dad likes. Lauren, my stepmother, said without even looking at me. She was standing by the kitchen counter, her perfect blonde hair in place, scrolling on her phone. I wasn't even sure she noticed me half the time. Sure, I said, pouring myself some coffee. I wasn't going to argue. It wasn't worth it. Also, make sure you're home early. Alex has an important job interview tomorrow, and he needs peace and quiet tonight, she added. I almost laughed. Alex, my stepbrother, was 24, the same age as me. But while I worked full-time, paid for my own things, and even helped out with bills, Alex did nothing. He stayed up late playing video games, slept till noon, and somehow, Lauren still treated him like a little prince. Got it, I mumbled, grabbing my bag and heading out. As I drove to work, I thought about how different life was before my mom died. Back then, my dad and I were close. We used to watch old movies together, eat junk food, and joke around. But after she passed away, everything changed. He met Lauren, and suddenly, our house wasn't mine anymore. It was hers. At work, I tried to push away my thoughts. I worked as a receptionist at a small law firm. It wasn't my dream job, but it paid the bills. Morning, Sarah, said Mike, one of the lawyers, as he walked in. Morning, I replied with a smile. The day went by fast, and before I knew it, I was back in my car, heading home. But as soon as I stepped inside, I could feel the tension. Sarah, finally, Lauren sighed. Did you get everything? I placed the grocery bags on the counter. Yeah, milk, eggs, coffee, everything you asked for. Good. And please be quiet. Alex needs to focus. I bit my tongue. Alex was lying on the couch, scrolling on his phone, looking as relaxed as ever. Right, I said, forcing a smile. I went to my room and closed the door. I felt exhausted, not from work, but from living here. Every day, it was the same. I gave and they took. And no matter how much I did, it was never enough. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Something inside me whispered that it was time for a change. But what kind of change? Leaving. Could I really do that? I didn't know yet. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep living like this. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of voices outside my room. At first, I thought I was dreaming. But then I heard Lauren's sharp tone, cutting through the silence of the house. You need to be more responsible, Alex, she said. You can't just sit around all day. I sat up in bed, surprised. Was she actually telling him to do something? I told you, I'll figure it out, Alex replied, his voice annoyed. It's not like Sarah's any better. I frowned. What was that supposed to mean? Lauren sighed. Sarah's different. She works, but she doesn't do enough around the house. She could help you more. Your family. I felt my stomach twist. Of course, it wasn't about Alex stepping up. It was about me doing even more. I got up, got dressed, and stepped out of my room. Both of them were in the kitchen, and when Lauren saw me, she smiled like nothing had happened. Morning, sweetheart, she said. Did you sleep well? I ignored the fake kindness. I heard what you said. Lauren raised an eyebrow. Oh, and I'm tired of it, I said. I work. I help with bills. I do everything you ask, and it's still not enough. Alex scoffed. Relax. No one's attacking you. But I felt attacked every single day. You know what? I said, grabbing my bag. I'm done. Lauren frowned. What do you mean? I mean, I'm leaving, I said. I don't know where yet, but I'll figure it out. Just like Alex. For the first time, Lauren looked surprised. My dad had just walked into the room, and I could see the confusion on his face. Sarah, what's going on? He asked. I turned to him, and for a moment, I hesitated. He wasn't a bad person. He was just weak. Ever since he married Lauren, he stopped being the dad I knew. I need to go, Dad, I said. I can't live like this anymore. He looked at me, like he wanted to say something, but then Lauren stepped closer to him, resting her hand on his arm. She's overreacting, she said. She'll calm down. I waited for my dad to argue, to say something, anything. But he didn't. He just looked at me, then down at the floor. And that was it. That was my answer. I grabbed my keys, walked out the door, and didn't look back. The moment I stepped outside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: relief. I didn't have a plan. I didn't even have a place to stay. But I knew one thing: I was free. I got in my car and started driving. I had some money saved, not a lot, but enough to get me through a couple of months if I was careful. The problem was, apartments weren't cheap. After an hour of searching, I found something. A tiny studio on the bad side of town. The rent was low, which made sense because the place was falling apart. The paint on the walls was peeling, and the bathroom sink was dripping. But when I stood in the middle of the empty room, I smiled. It was mine. That night, I lay on an old mattress I bought for cheap, listening to the city outside my window. No Lauren, no Alex, no tension in the air. I had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I was excited. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of traffic outside my window. The city was loud, alive, and completely different from what I was used to. I sat up, stretching my sore muscles. Sleeping on a cheap mattress on the floor wasn't great, but at least it was mine. I checked my phone. No messages from my dad. No calls from Alex. Not that I expected anything. I knew Lauren wouldn't let them reach out. If anything, she was probably celebrating my absence. The thought made my stomach twist, but I pushed it away. I wasn't going to waste my energy on them anymore. Instead, I focused on what was ahead. I needed furniture. I needed groceries. And most importantly, I needed a plan. My job paid enough to keep me afloat, but rent, bills, and food would drain my savings fast. I had to be smart. After a quick shower in the tiny, slightly moldy bathroom, I got dressed and headed out. The first stop was a thrift store down the street. It smelled like dust and old wood, but the prices were cheap. I found a small table, a chair, and a few kitchen items, all for under $50. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As I carried my finds back to the apartment, my phone buzzed. My heart jumped. I wasn't sure if I wanted it to be my dad or not, but when I looked at the screen, I saw a name I hadn't expected. Alex. For a second, I thought about ignoring it, but curiosity got the best of me. Hello. There was silence, then a deep sigh. Hey. I didn't know what to say. Was he calling to yell at me? To guilt trip me? I waited. So, you really left? He finally said. Yeah. I replied. I did. Another pause. Where are you? Why do you care? I don't know, he admitted. I guess. I just didn't think you'd actually do it. I leaned against the apartment door, feeling a mix of frustration and exhaustion. Of course you didn't, because you never had to. You could just sit back and let me deal with everything. That's not fair, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I laughed bitterly. Isn't it? You sat there and watched while Lauren treated me like crap. You let her act like I was some ungrateful burden while you did nothing. So yeah, I left, and I don't regret it. He exhaled long and slow. I didn't know it was that bad. I clenched my jaw. You didn't want to know. There was another pause, then a softer tone. Are you okay? I hesitated. The truth was, I wasn't sure. But I wasn't going to tell him that. I will be. Do you need anything? That question caught me off guard. Was he actually offering to help? No, I said. I got it. Right, he muttered. Well, I just wanted to check in. I wanted to believe that, but deep down, I knew he wasn't calling just because he cared. Something was up. Before I could ask, he said, Lauren's pissed. Good, I said without hesitation. She told Dad not to talk to you. I felt a familiar sting in my chest, but I pushed it down. And did he listen? A pause. Yeah, I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Of course he did. I don't think he wanted to, Alex said quickly. But you know how she is. Yeah, I said, voice flat. I know exactly how she is. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Alex sighed. I gotta go. Just take care of yourself, okay? I didn't reply. I just hung up. I stood there for a while, staring at my phone. A part of me wanted to scream, another part wanted to cry. But instead, I just took a deep breath and went inside. The rest of the day was spent setting up my new space. I put the table by the window, placed my thrifted plates in the kitchen, and tried to make the place feel less empty. It was small and a little depressing, but it was mine. That night, as I lay in bed, I kept thinking about my dad. Did he really not want to talk to me? Or was he just afraid of Lauren? Either way, it hurt. But I wasn't going to beg for his attention. Not anymore. I was on my own now. And for better or worse, I had to make it work. Days passed, and I started to settle into a routine. Work, home, sleep. Repeat. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. I learned to budget carefully, stretching my paycheck as far as it could go. I even found a second-hand couch for cheap, which made my apartment feel a little less like an empty box. But the silence was hard to get used to. No arguing, no passive-aggressive comments, no footsteps outside my door reminding me that I wasn't truly alone. Now I was. Completely. I told myself it was better this way. One evening after work, I stopped by a small grocery store near my apartment. I wasn't in the mood to cook anything complicated, so I grabbed some instant ramen and a few cheap essentials. As I stood in line, scrolling through my phone to avoid eye contact with strangers, a familiar name popped up on my screen. Alex. Again. I stared at it, debating whether to answer. The last call had left a weird taste in my mouth, but curiosity won over logic. Hello. Hey, he said. You busy? I looked at the line moving forward and sighed. Not really. What's up? Can we meet up? I frowned. Why? A pause. I need to talk to you. I wasn't sure if I wanted to see him, but there was something in his voice, hesitation, maybe even guilt, and against my better judgment, I found myself agreeing. Fine, I said. Where? We settled on a small diner halfway between our places. It was the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and a sticky floor, but at least it was cheap. When I arrived, Alex was already there, sitting in a corner booth with a half-empty soda in front of him. He looked different. Maybe it was just the lighting, but he seemed tired. I slid into the seat across from him. Okay, talk. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I don't really know how to say this. I folded my arms. Just spit it out. He looked up at me, his expression serious. Dad wants to talk to you. I froze. I hadn't expected that. Lauren's been on his case about cutting you off, he continued. She's pissed that you left. She keeps saying you abandoned the family, that you're ungrateful, that. I scoffed. Yeah, sounds like her. She's trying to turn him against you, he admitted. But I don't think it's working. He won't admit it, but I think he misses you. I stared at my hands, feeling something sharp twist in my chest. Did I want to talk to my dad? After everything? Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I think you should hear him out, Alex said. He's not perfect, but he's still Dad. I clenched my jaw. You didn't stand up for me when it mattered. His face tightened. I know. I waited for an excuse, but none came. Just those two words. I know. For a moment, I considered getting up and walking out. But deep down, I didn't want to be angry anymore. I was exhausted. Fine, I muttered. I'll talk to him. But if Lauren's there, I'm leaving. Alex nodded. I'll make sure she isn't. We finished our drinks in silence. Later that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind raced. What would I even say to my dad? Would he apologize? Would he blame me? I had no idea. The next day, I met him at a quiet park near my old neighborhood. He was sitting on a bench, hands clasped together, looking older than I remembered. When he saw me, he stood up awkwardly, as if he wasn't sure whether to hug me or not. Hey, he said. I stayed a few feet away. Hey. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. Finally, he sighed. I'm sorry. I blinked, caught off guard. For what? For everything. I crossed my arms. That's pretty vague. He nodded, rubbing his face. I should have done better. I should have protected you from her. But I didn't, and that's on me. I didn't know how to respond. Was this real? Or was he just saying what he thought I wanted to hear? I don't expect you to forgive me, he added. "But I don't want to lose you." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Then why did you let her treat me like that?" He looked away. "Because I was weak." For the first time, he wasn't making excuses. He wasn't defending her. He was just admitting it. "I don't know if I can trust you," I said honestly. He nodded. "I get that." Another long pause. Then he hesitated. "Can I take you to lunch?" I thought about it. About everything he had allowed to happen. About the years of feeling unwanted. And then I thought about the fact that he had finally said he was sorry. "Okay." We walked side by side, not saying much. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel completely alone. Lunch was quiet at first. My dad picked a small family-owned restaurant, the kind with faded menus and mismatched chairs. It felt strange sitting across from him like this, without Lauren watching over his shoulder. I ordered something simple, just a sandwich and coffee. He got the same, probably make things less awkward. "So," I said after the server left, "you said you were weak. What changed?" He exhaled, tapping his fingers against the table. "Lauren's been pushing me to cut you off completely. She doesn't want me to even talk to you." I rolled my eyes. "Of course. But I can't do that," he continued. "You're my daughter." I stared at him, searching for any sign of hesitation, but he looked sincere. For so long, I had convinced myself he didn't care, that I had lost him to her manipulation completely. But maybe I had been wrong. "She made my life hell," I admitted. "And you let happen." His shoulders sagged. "I know, and I hate myself for it." "Why did you marry someone like that?" I asked, genuinely curious. He was quiet for a moment. "Because I was lonely." That answer surprised me. "After your mom died, I wasn't handling it well," he admitted. "I felt lost. Lauren came into my life at a time when I needed someone. I thought she was helping me, but she was just taking control." I clenched my jaw. "And you let her push me aside." His gaze dropped to his hands. I did. I didn't know what to do with that. I had spent so much time hating him, blaming him, assuming he didn't care. And now, here he was, admitting everything. Not defending himself, not making excuses. Just accepting the truth. "So what now?" I asked. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I want to fix this. If you'll let me." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt in a single lunch. "I don't know either," I admitted. "But I guess this is a start." He gave a small nod, looking relieved. The rest of lunch was easier. We didn't talk about Lauren, or the past, or any of the painful things that had driven us apart. Instead, we talked about small things, his work, my job, random memories from when I was a kid. For the first time in years, it almost felt normal. After we finished eating, he hesitated. "Would it be okay if I called you sometimes? Just to check in?" I thought about it. It was a small thing, but for him, it was probably a big step. "Yeah," I said finally. "That'd be okay." His smile was subtle but real. We walked out of the restaurant together, and I expected things to end there. But just as I turned to leave, I saw something, or rather someone, that made my blood run cold. Lauren. She was standing near the parking lot, watching us. I had no idea how long she'd been there, but judging by the look on her face, it was long enough. She walked over slowly, her heels clicking against the pavement. "Well," she said, folding her arms, "isn't this cozy?" My dad stiffened beside me. "Lauren." She held up a hand. "Don't. Just don't." I could already see where this was going. "You really think you can go behind my back and have secret meetings with her?" she demanded. "After everything? After all the things she said about me?" I crossed my arms. "Oh, you mean the truth?" Her eyes narrowed. "You ungrateful little." Dad stepped between us. "That's enough." Lauren blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me." I said, "That's enough," he repeated, his voice steady. "You don't control who I talk to." She let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Oh, so now you have a backbone. Now, after all these years." He didn't say anything. He just stood there, looking at her with an expression I had never seen before. She scoffed. "You're pathetic." Then her gaze snapped to me. And you, stay away from my family. I tilted my head. Funny, I don't remember you being part of my family. Her face twisted with rage, but before she could say anything else, my dad turned to me. Go home, he said gently. I'll handle this. For a moment, I considered arguing, but then I saw the look in his eyes, firm, steady. He wasn't backing down. So I nodded, turned, and walked away. I didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, I had hope. I spent the whole drive home replaying the scene in my head. My father standing up to Lauren, the look on her face when he didn't immediately crumble, the sheer disbelief in her voice when he told her she didn't control him. I had never seen that before. For years, I thought he was hopelessly trapped under her influence, that nothing could shake the hold she had over him. But now I wasn't so sure. My phone buzzed as I pulled into my apartment complex. It was a text from my dad. I'm sorry you had to see that. Call me later. I stared at it for a moment before typing back. I will. I wasn't sure when, but I meant it. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. I kept expecting something to happen. A call. A message. A knock on my door. Something. But nothing came. It wasn't until 3 days later that I finally heard from my father again. I was at work when my phone rang. Seeing his name on the screen sent a strange rush of nerves through me. I stepped outside before answering. Hey, he exhaled, and I could hear the tension in his voice. Hey, I wanted to let you know I left. For a second, I didn't understand. Left what? Lauren, the house, all of it. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. You left her? I did. I gripped the phone tighter. Are you okay? I think so, he said. I'm staying at a hotel for now, but I wanted you to know. I'm done letting her control me. I didn't know what to say. I had dreamed about this moment for years, but I never thought it would actually happen. What made you do it? I asked finally. There was a pause. You did. My throat tightened. Me. I saw how much I had let her take from me, he admitted. How much I had let her hurt you. And I realized I couldn't keep doing it. I couldn't keep living that way. I closed my eyes. This didn't erase the past. It didn't undo the years of neglect, the choices he had made. But it was something. It was more than I ever expected. What are you going to do now? I asked. I don't know yet, he said. But I want to fix things with you. If you'll let me. I swallowed hard. I want that too. For the first time in years, I felt like I had my father back. But of course, Lauren wasn't going to let things end that easily. It started small. Strange calls from unknown numbers. Hang-ups when I answered. Then, I noticed a car parked near my apartment complex. One that looked suspiciously familiar. And then, the messages started. At first, I ignored them. But then one came through that made my blood run cold. Your father may have given up on this family, but I won't. You have no idea what you've started. I stared at the words, my hands shaking. This wasn't over. Not even close. I didn't respond to the message. I wanted to pretend it didn't bother me, that it was just another one of Lauren's manipulative games. But the truth was, it did bother me. A lot. She wasn't just lashing out. She was warning me. I didn't know what she meant by, you have no idea what you've started. But it didn't sound like an empty threat. For the next few days, I felt like I was being watched. Every time I left my apartment, I glanced around, half expecting to see her car parked nearby. I started locking my door the second I walked inside. Then, one night, my father called me. I think she's following me, he said. I sat up in bed, instantly alert. What? Where are you? I left work late, he said. I noticed a car behind me on the drive to the hotel. I took a few extra turns just to be sure, and it's still there. My stomach twisted. Do you think it's her? It has to be. I ran a hand through my hair. Dad, you need to be careful. She's acting weird. I know. His voice was tight. I shouldn't have underestimated her. I wanted to tell him to call the police, but what would they even do? She hadn't technically done anything illegal. Not yet. The next day, I got another text from her. Meet me. Just that. No time. No place. I stared at it for a long time before typing back. Why? A minute later, another message came through. You owe me that much. I didn't owe her a damn thing, but against my better judgment, I found myself responding. Where? She sent me an address. A cafe downtown. I hesitated, then typed. Fine. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting in the corner with a cup of coffee in front of her. She looked different, less polished than usual. Her hair wasn't perfectly styled. Her makeup wasn't as flawless. For the first time, she looked tired. I sat across from her, arms crossed. What do you want? She looked at me for a long moment before speaking. You ruined everything. I almost laughed. Me? Yes, you. Her voice was sharp. I had everything under control until you decided to interfere. I narrowed my eyes. You mean, until Dad decided to leave? He wouldn't have if it weren't for you, she snapped. I leaned forward. So what, you're stalking him now? Following him? Threatening me? Her lips pressed together. I just want things to go back to the way they were. I shook my head. That's not going to happen. She took a slow breath. Do you think he's better off without me? Yes. A flicker of something passed through her expression, but she quickly masked it. You don't understand, do you? You think this is just about your father leaving me. I frowned. What else would it be about? She gave me a long, calculating look. Then she leaned forward and whispered, Your father isn't the man you think he is. A chill ran down my spine. What are you talking about? She sat back, smirking slightly. You'll see. I clenched my fists. If you have something to say it. She took a sip of her coffee, then stood up. You'll find out soon enough. And just like that, she walked away. I sat there, my mind racing. I wanted to believe she was just messing with me, trying to get in my head. But something about the way she said it made me feel like she wasn't lying, and that terrified me. I didn't sleep that night. Lauren's words kept replaying in my mind. Your father isn't the man you think he is. What the hell did she mean by that? I wanted to dismiss it as another one of her manipulations, but the way she said it, so calm, so sure, left a knot in my stomach that I couldn't shake. The next morning, I called my dad. I need to talk to you, I said. Is everything okay? I hesitated. Can we meet? We met at a small diner near his hotel. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. His usual confidence slightly dimmed. I took a deep breath. I saw Lauren. His expression hardened instantly. Why? She wanted to meet. She said. I paused, searching his face. She said, You're not the man I think you are. His jaw clenched. I leaned forward. What does she mean? He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. She's trying to mess with you, that's all. That's not an answer. He hesitated. I've made mistakes. I frowned. What kind of mistakes? He didn't respond. Dad, I need to know. Is there something she could use against you? His fingers tapped against the table. Lauren knows how to twist things. She'll take a grain of truth and turn it into something else entirely. That wasn't an answer either. I exhaled sharply. So you to do something? His eyes flickered. Not in the way she wants you to think. That didn't exactly make me feel better. I pushed my plate aside, suddenly having no appetite. If there's something I need to know, tell me now, before she does. He looked at me for a long moment, then finally said, I didn't leave Lauren just because of you. I blinked. What? He shifted uncomfortably. I wasn't happy with her for a long time, but I also wasn't exactly innocent in our marriage. A cold feeling settled in my chest. I knew what he was saying before he even said it. You cheated. His silence was answer enough. I stared at him, my stomach twisting. With who? He hesitated again. It doesn't matter. I let out a hollow laugh. Oh, it definitely matters. His lips pressed together. It was someone I met through work. I shook my head. Lauren knows, doesn't she? She found out before I left. My breath caught. So when you told me you left her because of me, I didn't want you to feel responsible. He interrupted. I was miserable with her, and yes, I wanted out. But I also knew she'd use whatever she could to make me look like the bad guy. I stared at him, my mind racing. Lauren wasn't lying, or at least, not entirely. I swallowed hard. Does Mom know? He looked away. That told me everything I needed to know. I pushed back my chair, standing abruptly. I need to go. Wait. But I was already walking out the door. I couldn't breathe. All this time, I'd been so sure I knew the whole story. That my father was the victim, and Lauren was just a manipulative liar. But it wasn't that simple. And if she had been telling the truth about this, what else had she been telling the truth about? I spent the next few days replaying that conversation with my father over and over in my head. The weight of his confession hit me harder than I had anticipated. It wasn't just the fact that he had cheated. It was the realization that I had been living a lie for so long. I had built this entire narrative around my family, their brokenness, their dysfunction, and I had always believed my father was the victim. But now, I wasn't so sure anymore. Lauren had been right about one thing. My dad wasn't the man I thought he was. I had always wanted to believe that the end of their marriage was solely because of my father's unhappiness with her. But hearing him admit his own mistakes made me question everything. The betrayal wasn't just a one-sided affair. He had contributed to it. And somehow, it made me feel more connected to Lauren than ever before. It made me feel like the entire family had failed me. My mother was gone. My father had made decisions that broke everything I knew about him. And Lauren, despite her manipulative nature, had probably been dealing with the same mess I was now waking up to. I didn't know where to turn. There was no one I could trust completely, not even myself. It was late on a Friday afternoon when I decided to go back to the house. I hadn't been back in days, ever since the conversation with my dad. I hadn't spoken to him since either. It was hard to stomach the idea of facing him again. I didn't know what to say. How do you look at someone who's been your rock for so many years and suddenly realize that they've been just as broken as you are? That they've been lying, keeping secrets, and pretending for your sake? I felt like a fool. I pulled up to the house and stared at it for a long moment, wondering what I was even doing here. The house still looked the same, but everything felt different. It wasn't home anymore. When I opened the door, the familiar smell of coffee and the sound of the TV playing in the background greeted me. Lauren was sitting on the couch, her usual smirk playing at the corners of her lips when she saw me. "Look who decided to show up," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I didn't respond immediately. I wasn't sure what I wanted to say. The words felt stuck in my throat. "How's your father?" she continued, clearly enjoying my discomfort. "He's fine," I said flatly, walking past her to the kitchen. She followed me. "I'm surprised you're not running off to him, telling him how bad I've been. It's what you always do." I turned to her, finally meeting her eyes. "You're right about one thing," I said, my voice shaking just a little. "I don't know what I'm supposed to believe anymore." Lauren raised an eyebrow. "What's that supposed to mean?" I took a deep breath. "You were right. About him." Her eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "About my dad," I said, the words coming out like daggers. "He's not the man I thought he was. He cheated on you. And for all these years, I believed that he was the one who was wronged. But he wasn't." Lauren didn't seem surprised. She just looked at me, waiting for me to finish. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," I said, my voice cracking. "This family, these lies, that's all too much." Lauren stepped forward. "So what? You think you're just going to walk away from it all? After everything?" I stared at her, my mind racing. The anger I had felt toward her in the past was slowly shifting into something else, something closer to empathy. "I don't know," I said quietly. "I don't know how to fix any of this, and I'm not sure I can." Lauren sighed heavily. "None of us can fix it. Trust me. But you're not alone. You never were." I shook my head. "It doesn't feel that way." We stood in silence for a moment, both of us seemingly unsure of what to say next. And then I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. My father walked into the room, his tired eyes meeting mine. "I was wondering when you'd come back," he said, his voice quiet. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to scream at him, ask him why he had kept so many secrets, why he hadn't been the man I needed him to be. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just stared at him, feeling the weight of all the years of resentment and disappointment bearing down on me. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said after a long pause. "I've made mistakes, and I've hurt you. I should have been more honest with you." I shook my head. "You should have been more than just sorry, Dad. You should have been a father." He took a step forward, his eyes pleading. I know. I just didn't want to lose you, and I didn't know how to fix it." "Don't make this about me," I snapped. "You did this to yourself." Lauren stepped forward then, her voice surprisingly calm. "Maybe we've all done this to ourselves, Sarah. Maybe we've all been holding on to so many things that we didn't know how to let go of." I looked at them both, feeling a strange sense of defeat settling into my bones. I wasn't sure if I was angry at them or at myself for still caring. "I need space," I said finally, my voice trembling with exhaustion. "I can't be here right now." Before either of them could respond, I turned and walked out the door, not sure where I was going, but knowing that I couldn't stay there. It was dark by the time I got to my car, and I found myself sitting there for a few minutes, staring at nothing. The truth was that I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know if I wanted to forgive my father or Lauren, or if I even could. I didn't know if there was a way to go back to the way things were, or if I should even try. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living in a family that felt more like a trap than a support system. I had to figure out who I was outside of all of this, outside of the lies, outside of the betrayal, outside of everything I thought I knew. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like the only thing that mattered. After the awkward silence between me and my father had settled, the words felt heavy. It was like we were two strangers, both of us trying to bridge a gap that had been widening for years. His age had begun to show more than before. The lines on his face were deeper, and the weight of his shoulders sagged like he had spent a lifetime carrying burdens too heavy for him to bear. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but it definitely wasn't this. My father had always been the strong, silent type. His presence in the house had been a constant, but never comforting. He'd always been there, physically at least, but emotionally he was absent. After my mother died, things just got worse, and the space between us seemed to grow by the day. I wanted to scream at him, to blame him for everything, but looking at his tired face, it was hard to keep up that anger. I took a deep breath, and finally broke the silence. "Dad," I began, my voice softer than I had anticipated. "What happened? Why did you let things get so bad between us?" He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes searching my face, as though trying to find the right words. "I don't know, Sarah. I wasn't strong enough to deal with everything after your mother was gone. I thought I could fix things by pretending they didn't hurt." His voice cracked slightly, and I saw the hint of tears in his eyes. "I thought if I kept everything together on the outside, I could protect you and Alex from the pain. But I guess I only pushed you both further away." His words stung more than I expected. I had spent so long holding on to this anger, but hearing him admit his shortcomings made it feel so much more real. It wasn't just me who was affected by the distance in our relationship. He was hurt too. "I understand now," he continued, his voice quiet. "I made mistakes. I wasn't there when you needed me, and I don't know how to make up for that." I felt the weight of his confession settle in my chest. It wasn't enough to fix everything, but it was a start. I didn't know if I was ready to forgive him completely, but in that moment, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I could start to heal. For so long, I had wanted answers, wanted him to acknowledge my pain, and now here it was. I swallowed hard, wiping my eyes. "You know, I've been angry at you for so long," I said, my voice trembling. "For not being there, for not even trying to see what was going on with me. I felt like I was carrying everything alone, like you didn't care." "I do care, Sarah," he said quickly. "I just didn't know how to show it. I thought if I kept working, if I kept the house together, it would somehow make everything better. But it didn't." I nodded, trying to process everything. My father had always been a man of few words, but now, hearing him speak honestly, I felt as if a piece of the puzzle was falling into place. For years, I'd resented him for not being the father I needed, for not stepping up when I needed him the most. But maybe I had been too quick to judge. Maybe, just like me, He had been struggling to deal with all the loss and change in our lives. We sat there in silence for a while, both of us lost in our own thoughts. The tension in the room was thick, but it wasn't as suffocating as it had been before. There was something different about this moment, something that felt real. "I don't know what to do now," I said quietly, finally breaking the silence. "I'm still so angry, Dad, but I don't want to keep carrying this weight around anymore. I can't keep living like this." "I understand," he said softly, nodding. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away. Hell, I don't even know if I deserve it. But I want to try. I want to rebuild what we lost, if you'll let me." I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in a long while. He wasn't perfect, far from it, but he was trying. For the first time in forever, I could see that he was genuinely trying. "I don't know what the future holds," I said, my voice shaky but steady. "But maybe we can figure it out together. I'm not saying it'll be easy, but I'm willing to try." A small, tentative smile tugged at the corner of his lips. It was the first real smile I had seen from him in years. "Thank you, Sarah. That's all I can ask for." I stood up, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over me. The anger I had carried for so long was still there, lingering beneath the surface, but now it didn't feel as all-consuming. I had a long way to go before I could truly forgive him, but this was a step in the right direction. "I think I need some time," I said quietly, gathering my things. "But I'm willing to take that step forward, for both of us." He nodded, standing up as well. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here." As I left the room, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, hope. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I wasn't alone. Maybe there was hope for our family after all. I stepped out into the cool evening air, feeling the weight of the conversation slowly lift from my shoulders. It wasn't over, but it was a new beginning for both of us. And as I walked away, I couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other, even if it took time, even if it took everything we had. The past was never going to change, but the future, that was still ours to write. And for the first time in a long time, I was willing to give it a try.
Thank you very much for watching. Did you like this story? Like, subscribe, and write a comment about your opinion.